Hey y'all. As you'll hear in this episode, previous guest of the show, Russell Dillon, passed away at 14 on the day this episode was recorded. I wanted to let you know of a couple opportunities to support the family before we got started, and know that there will be more opportunities on the way. First, there is a GoFundMe, and that link will be in the show notes of this episode. Second, from here on out, all the proceeds from the t-shirt in the Faith and Fishing merch store with the quote from Russell will go to Make-A-Wish, specifically to make a fishing wish come true. I hope you will consider donating, and I hope you enjoy this awesome episode with Michael Jaquith.
My name is Randy Howell, and you're listening to the Faith and Fishing Podcast.
Welcome to the Faith and Fishing Podcast. I'm Cam.
And I'm Robert. In every episode, we're bringing you faith stories and fishing memories from some amazing members of the fishing community.
So join us as we shed a positive light on all things faith and fishing. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Faith and Fishing Podcast. I'm Cam, and I am without my trusty co-host this week. Robert had quite a day at work, and that is as much as I know, but yeah, he is not going to be able to make it. I know how that is. Friday was that day for me. I ended up, something happened with electrical stuff that blew a timer up in my face, and I'm very lucky man to be here right now. So just a couple quick housekeeping things before we jump into our guest for this week. Next week, I am not entirely sure what the episode is going to be like. I am going to be in Tennessee at the Paddle and Fin opener with the guys from Paddle and Fin podcast out there. So I may end up getting an episode up. I may not. If not, I apologize in advance, but we will see how it goes. I am wearing my Russell Strong fishing let me try that again. I am wearing my Russell Strong fishing hat today, and got some sad news. Y'all know we've been praying on the podcast for the past couple weeks for Russell Dillon, who passed away today from the brain bleed from new tumor growth. For those of you who did not know, he came on the podcast in our first season, and he was 12 at the time. I think he was 14 when he passed, but he might have been 15. I don't remember exactly when his birthday was, but he opened up with, "My name is Russell Dillon. I have a brain tumor, but I don't worry about that. I just fish. And man, his joy and his just excitement for the future. I've been trying to think of the words to say since I found out, and I don't have much other than just, my heart just breaks for his family, and I just pray comfort over them. God is the comforter of all comforters, and he's got his work cut out for him comforting on this one, I know, but he can do it. So, like I said, I don't want to choke up too much on this one, but, I barely knew him, and I'm going to miss him like crazy. So let's thank a couple of the sponsors that make this show possible, and then we will get this week's guest introduced.
Get Outdoors Pedal and Paddle is one of the largest canoe, kayak, and cycling retailers in the Southeast, with a huge selection of kayaks, canoes, bikes, and all the accessories needed to experience paddling and cycling comfortably and safely. Get Outdoors helps to expand and educate the paddling community through their free demos held on local lakes in the Greensboro, North Carolina area, and through in-store clinics and on-the-water courses and demos. And we'll even get your new boat rigged up for kayak fishing for you. Stop by the shop in Greensboro, North Carolina, or check out shopgetoutdoors.com to be wowed by their selection.
If finesse fishing is your comfort zone, something you want to learn better this year, or just something you like to tie on as a Hail Mary pass, Jade's Jigs has everything you need and more, and it's all eco-friendly and lead-free. With an awesome selection of baits and colors, they've got a variety of techniques covered for you. Finesse jigs, underspins, Nico weights, Ned rigs, and more are all waiting for you at jadesjigs.com. And while you're there, use promo code FNF10 for 10% off your purchase. That's jadesjigs.com and promo code FNF10 for 10% off. All right, so this week we have Michael, and I goofed and I did not ask him how to pronounce his name whenever I had him on at the beginning of the show here, but I'm going to give it a shot, and he is going to correct me when he gets on. But Michael Jaquith, and let me super not prepared here, but Dr. Michael Jaquith is a PhD chemist who left the corporate world and now helps men everywhere discover how to escape addictions and live a more meaningful and fulfilling life. Certified through the Life Coach School with specialization in addiction, he combines cutting-edge science and coaching expertise with the time-honored teachings of the faith. Michael is married with 6 children and lives in rural northern Idaho, and he reached out on Podmatch. Some of our favorite guests have come through Podmatch and said, I love to fish, and I would love to talk to your listeners about my faith and about fishing. So, Michael, welcome to the show. How did I do on your last name, brother?
Cam, it's a delight to be here. I want to join you in mourning for the passing of that young man. And first off, just thank you for the courage you have to show the mourning for that young man. I know this is a very powerful thing. You can see by your face how important he was. As far as my name, no one ever gets it right. Don't feel bad at all. It's pronounced Jaquith. But again, I think that's such a great example of how much bigger things we have as servants of God than to worry about a name pronunciation. But I'm delighted to be here.
Absolutely, man. So to get us started off, kind of introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us who Michael Jaquith is.
So Michael Jaquith's a very stubborn guy that God was very patient with. And in my own story, I come from a pretty bumpy beginning. My father was not an ideal father. The word abusive does apply in almost every capacity. And I kind of left that environment running from God. I was like, we were raised in a semi-religious household, and I wanted nothing to do with that. And so I left running. I pursued what I called the Church of Hedonism, which means the pursuit of pleasure. And took me about 15 years, 12 of which in actively grappling with the idea of faith before I decided to convert. And that was back in 2008. And I don't know about you, Cam, but those of us, or what's your stories, but for many of us who convert as an adult, we have this idea that I found Jesus, my problems are solved. And that wasn't the case for me. And I kind of kept going and discovered that I still was a really stubborn person and that God was still really patient with me. And through the next 10 years, I continued to try to do things my way, have God lovingly say, nope, that's not going to work. And then God brought these amazing mentors, these amazing coaches, these amazing men into my life that helped me to become someone that I don't know that I ever could have been on my own, but certainly could never have been on my own. And so now I stand before you here as this guy who's figured a few things out, loves helping other guys figure a few things out, but is under no illusions whatsoever. Any of it was under my own merit.
That is awesome. So you were a life coach. And so, I don't know about all of my listeners, but I am not 100% sure what a life coach does. I've heard the term, but I've never actually spoken with one. I've never looked into what a life coach is, what they do. And I know to a certain extent it's self-explanatory in the name. You coach somebody through life, but what does that look like?
Let me maybe put this into some historical context. More than 200 years ago, everyone lived in a small community. You basically grew up more or less in the same community as your parents. You knew everybody. There was the old timer, old Bob, and when you had troubles, maybe old Bob might walk up and lovingly say, "Hey, young pup, I see you're doing this. How's that working out for you?" And you have a conversation, and you'd go do a little better. Well, we don't live in that age anymore. We now live in this highly dispersed, highly disconnected society. And we don't have that transfer of information from one generation to the next. And so this whole industry of life coaching is sort of evolving to fill that gap. And here's the basic premise. If you want to be a great basketball player, you can get a certain ways on your own, and eventually you have to hire a coach because the coach sees from the outside perspective, oh, you're twisting wrong, your grip's changing as you hold the ball. Oh, maybe you're shooting a little earlier, your breath is off, whatever. A life coach is somebody who's able to come in and do something similar for you in terms of how is your life going. A lot of times I help guys who maybe aren't showing up in their marriage the way they want to be. Maybe they're suffering with some sort of addiction problem. Maybe they're just, drifting, and they know they're drifting, and they know that God made them for more, but they just don't know how to get there. So often, Cam, there's something that we do to block the flow of God's grace into our lives. And so where I come in particularly is I really bring in the faith element strong. For me, the faith is an essential part of this process. And so you could almost think of the modern life coaching as this sort of combination of a coach like in sports, a mentor like some old guy, and even a little bit of spiritual direction, I say with great humility.
Okay, absolutely. So in your bio, it says that you specialize in addiction. Is there a certain reason that you gravitated towards addiction?
I think probably because it's my own story. And I just need to be fully transparent, and I won't go into any details, but I was addicted to pornography for many, many years. And I think that is just an utterly rampant problem in our society. And unfortunately, the statistics do conclude that it is everywhere. And one of my messages I want to tell guys is, look, this problem is real. This problem is everywhere. And the real problem isn't necessarily what you think it is. Like, yeah, I know. We all know it's bad. We all know it's morally evil, but we let that slide because we somehow tell ourselves it's okay, whatever. But the real cost is in who you could be and who you could be before your creator and your maker. And at the end of the day, when I stand before Jesus and my own personal judgment day, whatever that looks like, not going to make any predictions times here. I'm not into that camp, but whatever that day comes, I'll stand there and God's going to call me to be accountable for what I've done with this life and this time and this energy that he has given me. And so many of us are squandering that. Men don't know how to throw themselves into something, to become the man they want them to be. And addictions are one of the more stubborn things that blocks that. Not the only. I help clients who are looking for changes of jobs. So often the problem that's blocking them is not actually their technical skills, but how they view themselves internally. And that internal identity and image component is essential. And these are all highly connected, but I hope that kind of answers the question. Absolutely.
So, what is the name of your business, or is it just Michael Jaquith? Somebody wants to kind of learn more. How do they find out more? All that good stuff.
So I mentioned earlier that faith is absolutely critical to me, and it's so important that I put the faith name directly into the business name. My business name is CatholicLifeCoachForMen.com. I'm a Catholic. I'm a Christian. If you are of the Christian faith, I will work with you. If you're not, and you're curious about the Christian faith, let's talk. You won't be the first guy to get in that particular line. And I love to talk about the faith and why I believe it's so important. But in general, I focus on those because so much of my work is going to be involving prayer, meditation, surrender to the Lord. Those are central, very masculine concepts. So Catholic Life Coach for Men, if you throw a .com, you have my website. You throw a podcast, you find my podcast.
Okay, absolutely. And what is your podcast?
So it's also Catholic Life Coach for Men, is the name of it. And it really is just this podcast designed as sort of a self-guided life coaching tour into a lot of the problems that guys encounter. We talk about addiction. We talk about identity. We talk about self-image. I have a lot of guests on that talk about money. We'll talk about health. We talk about finance, talk about even sexual issues, marriage, fathering. All these are really, really critical issues that men today are facing.
Okay. And you're on which platforms are you on?
So I'm on most of them. The lion's share is Apple, iTunes kind of downloads. To be honest, Cam, I'm not the tech wizard guy. Despite my chemistry background, the social media stuff is smarter than me. But that, I think at this point in time, if you can't find it, it's just keep looking at a different one because it's on most of them.
Okay, absolutely. How often do you have episodes come out?
So pretty much once a week, sometimes twice a week.
Okay. And how long are the episodes?
Generally about 45 minutes, sometimes as low as 30. Sometimes I had one of those an hour and a half because, sure you've experienced it. Sometimes you have such a great conversation. You're like, I don't want this one to end. It's too much fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we kind of have, we, as interviewers, we follow into a rut of doing things in a certain order and everything. And this one has kind of just flipped over my normal thing, and I love it. So, you alluded to your faith story a little bit earlier. Is that something you wanted to dive into a little deeper in this episode?
Yeah, I'd love to go there. And, I think I've encountered a lot of guys who say, I was a little slow. It took me several years before I finally relented to God's knocking. And I tell them, guys, that's nothing. Like, I had all the knowledge. I had all the information. And I was in 9th grade when I met a young man whose name was Paul, ironically. And Paul and I loved two things in common. We loved the outdoors and we loved to argue. And those two go together very, very well. And we'd spend hours and hours, and he'd take the religious side, the side of the faith, and I would take whatever side opposed him, because I kind of was just angry. And we'd debate, go back and forth. And I tell you, Cam, I knew for years in my head that the faith was right. I knew it without a shadow of a doubt, but I was too hurt. I wasn't willing to open my heart up. I was too angry. And for a long time, I struggled and tried to do it my own way. I was somehow convinced if I just drank enough alcohol, watched enough porn, chased enough ladies, full reveal, actually, I had no idea how to chase ladies then. It's funny, after getting married, I learned much more actually about, what makes men attractive to ladies, which is super helpful if you want to have a good marriage. We'll get back to that. And I chased and I chased and I chased, and it was always empty. And I remember I was at church, and I've been going to church for a little while. I hadn't decided yet, mind you, still stubborn. I hadn't decided. And I've been going to church for a little while. And I'm sitting there in the parking lot. And I'm praying, Lord, I think you want me to do this. Give me some sign so it's not subtle. And so it happens to be an Ash Wednesday Mass service. Okay. And so I literally, imagine the scene. I'm walking up to the door. I open the door. And this church, which is, 100 feet wide, has this banner across the entire top thing hanging that reads, "Repent today, don't wait." And I was like, okay, that was subtle, Lord. I think I got the message here. I think I see what you're trying to say to me, right? And so I said, all right, I'll do it. And it is a process you have to go through. It took a little longer than I wanted to. I ended up finding this awesome opportunity to go through private instructions with this old Italian priest. He was a character. He could barely walk. He was just, had just from overweight and knee problems. And so this one day we're pulling in, there's this parking spot right in front of this restaurant. And he says, "Oh, bless you, Lord, for giving me this parking spot." And he goes for it. And all of a sudden another car turns and starts going for it as well. He looks at the car and says, "Oh, bless you if you do not take that parking spot." And bless you twice if you do. And of course the other car took the parking spot. And I just looked at that as such a great role model for me of surrender. And Cam, this is something I struggled with, given my own past. I struggle with the idea of surrendering to God. I want it to be my way. I wanted to be in control. And that has been sort of the major struggle. So I have my come to Jesus moment. I convert. I joined the church. And that wasn't the end of it. I can keep going on here for ways, but again and again, God was patient with me. The next person who really entered my life was a man named Ben. And I had one child at the time. We have 6 now. At the time I have one. She's 1 year old. We're in the cry room and I'm just angry. I'm not being mean, but I'm angry. And you can tell when another man is angry, and Ben's watching. And by the grace of God, next Sunday, Ben walks up to me after church. He has very great humility. He's such a humble guy. Shakes my hand. He says, "All right, Michael. Hi, Michael. My name's Ben. I want to introduce myself. I don't want you to take this the wrong way. I would love to be available. I'd love to talk if you ever need to. maybe in some ways you remind me of me a few years ago, but in case you're having any troubles, in case you're struggling, I wanted to reach out to you. He reached over and hands me this little flash drive filled with audiobooks and audio talks. I'm sure it's probably a copyright violation somewhere. Don't call the lawyers. And in this thing is all this information about the faith, about growing, about becoming a better man. And of course, the very first one was about anger. Real subtle, Ben. But he was humble. And sure enough, good to his word. I called him up. We had lunch. I listened to a bunch of the content. And that launched me into another way of just looking at how can I grow in my faith and allow God's grace to come through me, even after I've quote unquote become Christian again, but still had blocks in my heart that I hadn't let God into.
That is awesome. It's so awesome to hear those stories where a man steps up and offers himself as a mentor to someone else. That is something that our society needs a lot of, and I think that's why people like you are so important. But yeah, those. If you're in that situation where you see something like that and you're like, I've been there, this guy needs somebody who has been there to kind of lean on or whatever. I encourage you to be that person. If you're listening to this and you feel you were there, be that person. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be a great coach or somebody who is a great communicator, but just be someone who's willing to listen, and that makes a huge difference in so many people's lives.
So true. That's a great call to action. If you're listening and you know someone who needs you, take action, introduce yourself. If nothing else, you can just tell your story. Stories are very powerful. Absolutely. We just talked about that this week on social media. That's the reason this podcast exists, is because there is somebody out there who needs to hear your story, and this podcast is all about sharing stories. So, absolutely, man. So I'm kind of chomping at the bit to jump into the fishing side of things. Let's do it. I could sense that.
Because we have never, to my recollection, best of my abilities, we have never dived into or dove into whatever the correct verb is. We have never gone into ice fishing. And that is something that you said that you were passionate about, and something that you have a lot of memories with. So there in Idaho, kind of give us an idea of how you got started into fishing, what kind of fishing you do, what kind of fish you're targeting, kind of run the gamut of your fishing background and how it's come to where you are today with fishing.
Absolutely. So let me actually say, I actually grew up in northern Michigan. So we still did a lot of ice fishing. And just to set some context here for people who aren't familiar with the way the North works, at different ice thicknesses, they can hold a lot of weight. Like up in northern Michigan, guys drive their trucks out on the ice, and it's not as crazy as it sounds. Like in places in northern Russia, they use the lakes as highways because it's actually an easier way to do it because that ice gets so thick and so strong. And so ice fishing, there's kind of two different flavors of ice fishing. A lot of people think of ice fishing, they imagine some old guy sitting in a bucket with his back bent in a funny shape in one little hole. He's kind of wiggling his little pole through that one little hole, and he's cold and his fingers are blue. He's not having a lot of fun. And sure, that exists. There's also the other end of the spectrum, which is these guys who in Michigan would tow out, like imagine like almost like a cottage or like a full-size shack. They'd tow it out onto the ice with their pickup trucks, drop it off, drill the holes, and they'd have a heater in there. They'd have a couch in there. They might even have a TV in there. Like they'd move into those places and just hang out, if you know what I mean. And so like you can call that ice fishing too. And there's everything in between. But for me, I grew up in northern Michigan. We did tons of fishing. My grandfather was very, very big into fishing. And so from a young age, I remember going fishing with my grandfather. And what really stuck with me is fishing was a time where as a man, you could be present with another man, doing something together. So you weren't just like staring at each other being like, how are you feeling? I don't know. How are you feeling? This is awkward. But in doing something together, but still talking about things that matter. And, you're a young boy. Okay, maybe there's not as much real matter, but a little bit. It still feels like, as your grandfather, my grandfather's a very loving man. He was very, very Christian, very alive in his faith. And that came through his ice fishing. And so he had this 12-foot aluminum rowboat. We had lots of adventures there, all sorts of adventures of time things go wrong. You get to see how does a real man solve it when it goes wrong. But the ice fishing part is one part that I think is a little more unique up to the north. And so the way that we did ice fishing was a little more casual. We weren't quite as serious about it. It was more about the quality of who you were with. So we'd go out, we'd drill a few holes. Different states have different regulations about how many poles you're allowed to have. For example, in Idaho, you're allowed to have 5 poles in the ice per valid fisherman or woman who's there fishing. So growing up this way, it was really important to me that I get my kids involved in this activity, not because I love fish, which is delicious, not because I think it leads to great physique, which it kind of doesn't, but because of the quality of connection you have with an activity that provides you with something to do that leaves a lot of space for other stuff, if that makes sense. I love hunting too. The problem is hunting, you can't really talk because you have to be quiet. Fishing, especially ice fishing, they don't hear much. It's a pretty thick layer of ice. And so this has sort of evolved. Let me maybe fast forward if it's okay to kind of how ice fishing looks like for me now. So we go out on the lake. And this next part may be a little crazy to you. We'll bring out an ATV. We bring out snow tubes, and I'll have like a 20-foot, straps that connect to the back of the ATV. We haul out a big cargo sled because, you could haul it yourself, but I'm thinking, 5, whatever, to 10 kids out there with me, maybe another adult. And we're going to bring out a big heated shelter. We throw that up and we make a party of it. And sure, there's fishing and there's catching stuff, but there's also snow tubes that are ripping across the ice. And it's kind of like an all-day event. But still, it's really important to me that we create those windows of time where the ATV is turned off, where, we have little stoves, so make hot dogs and hot cocoa and instant oatmeal and all that kind of stuff out in the ice, all warm stuff. You have those times where you're just standing there watching the poles and nothing's biting and the conversation comes up. And I think for me, that is the heart of why I like fishing the most.
That is awesome. So I have so many questions. First of all, as someone from North Carolina, the ice fishing to me is whenever the very edge of the pond has a little bit of ice on it. But what is snow meal?
Snow meal. Instant oatmeal. Sorry, I mumbled. That was my bad. Instant oatmeal is just you have hot water and you pour it like the sugary, like mostly sugar solution. Sorry, I didn't articulate that well. Every
time it snows here, and I threw up air quotes for those of you who are above the Mason-Dixon and don't believe that a North Carolina boy knows what snow is. You're right, but we they make snow cream, which is like you take snow and sugar and I think like vanilla extract or something and mix it together and try to do it before it melts and have like a little treat. And I didn't know I heard snow meal. I'm hard of hearing also. So I heard snow meal, thought it was something to do with the snow, but
we've done stuff like that. Yeah. We've definitely made desserts like that before.
Okay. So I did think it was funny that even ice fishing, if you're up in that area, you can't get away from the wake boats with the dragging the tubes behind them and everything. But
it's true.
So what are you fishing for?
So up here we have a lot of trout. There are some of the more traditional fish. You can, get into some panfish. There's some bass. A lot of times it's a different pace of fishing because everything is so cold. What tends to happen, my understanding, at least from my more limited amount of conventional northern lake fishing, is you always have kind of packs of fish that move around. But with ice fishing, there's a secondary factor. You still have the packs moving around, but sometimes they're just like kind of like in hybrid mode. They're like swimming along. They're like blah, blah, life, whatever. Not really hungry, not really hungry. And then it just turns on, like all your poles light at once. And this is one of the reasons I think why you're allowed to have so many poles. And like when I've got 5 kids out there, legally, I could put 30 poles in the ice, which isn't crazy. You just go drill, like I use a little 4-inch auger because, by the way, pro tip, if you take kids on the ice, use a 4-inch auger, not the 6 and 8 that everyone else loves. Sure, it's a little harder to get a big fish up through a 4-inch hole, but thus far, I have yet to have any child, even age 3, successfully get their boot down a 4-inch augered hole. And I've seen them put their boot down a 6-inch hole, and that's what we call a trip ending event. event. You go home because that child is now very, very cold and wet and soaked through to the leg. So 4-inch hole, huge key there. You spread these poles out. But anyways, back to it's a lot of trout. We have a lot of rainbow trout up here in Idaho. Where I grew in Michigan, on the Great Lakes, you have lake trout. Oh, those are so much nicer, so big. Although those you probably would really struggle with a 4-inch hole. We used bigger holes back then.
I was going to ask if lake trout was something that you targeted.
Back then, yes. In Michigan, yeah, it's so much more meat to them, man. Sometimes you pull up these little tiny rainbows here, and I almost feel bad for them. Like, we pulled up a little 6-incher. Oh, I shouldn't say this too loud. If this wouldn't be going out to anyone, don't let the Idaho Fishing Game know this. We kept one that was exactly the bare minimum legal size, wink, wink. Anyway, because it was the first fish. And of course, the first fish, when you have kids, always has to be celebrated. And this poor thing made two bites by the time I was done slaughtering my fillet of it. And anyways, I will say actually that I've had a couple times, Idaho Fishing Games is our local, enforcement agency. And every time I've engaged with them, when they see that a couple dads, bunch of kids, they've bent over backwards to be helpful, supportive. I've never gotten a single ticket, even if it's actually doing something wrong. Like, I've just been really impressed with how helpful they've been. But we do you'll pull up some bass sometimes. Those are nice. Pull up some crappie sometimes. A couple panfish. Generally, our panfish don't get very big. And so we tend not to target them. But there's some areas, some of the bigger reservoirs, you can pull up, 14 to 18-inch trout.
Okay. And so, like I said, a lot of questions because this is something that is so far out of my wheelhouse. I have absolutely no clue what's going on. What kind of gear are you using? Are you using like the really short rods and you using like little jigs, or are you using like what are you using for that?
So it kind of runs the gamut. When I first started fishing with my kids, I stole my grandfather's techniques, which is don't buy nice gear, because that way if the kids lose it and drop it over the side of the boat, you don't have to get mad. And so my first set of gear was literally like $5 and $10 pole reel combinations I picked up at garage sales. And I picked up like a half dozen of those. I'm like, cool kids, we got poles. Let's go fishing. And sure enough, first day out there, Dad, my pole just jumped in the water on its own. I don't know what happened. And you're like, oh, buddy, we got to work on that. Okay, we have another pole. It's all right. And like, but if when you buy a really nice thing and the kids do that, you're like, like the Homer Simpson strangling Bart Simpson image comes to mind right now, right? And so that's my starting point. And you can work with those with ice fishing. You totally can. One of my tricks that I'll do if you have no other gear than cheap poles, when you auger your hole out and you're pulling up, you pull up a bunch of slush that was the cut up ice, and a bunch of water comes with it too, a little whoosh from your spinning auger. And then you just take your big rubber boot and you kind of scoop it from each side into like a little mound of slush and jab the bottom of the pole in that. And that works. It's not the fancy tensioned line that helps set the hook. Hey, those are cool. But if all you got is that, the way you know the fish is on, because the pole falls over, the fish comes by, takes the hook, the pole falls on the ice. Like, oh, look, there's a fish. You run over, grab it. And so you can start with that. Since then, I've upgraded a little bit here and there, as we fishermen tend to do. And I've taken PVC pipes and built little pipe holders. They will sell little ice fishing specific things that will like tension the pole. You clip in the line. So when the fish pulls it out of the clip, then the pole snaps back up and starts to set the hook. I haven't done those as much because I'm afraid my little kids are going to dink with them. I don't want them to hurt themselves. By all means, you can do jigging. What I'll oftentimes do if the fishing is really slow is we'll set up the field of poles. And then if we're in a heated shelter and if it's a cold day, I'll drill a hole in there. Otherwise, just drill a hole outside and just jig one line, something sparkly on the bottom of it with a little bit of bait. In ice fishing, one of the things you want to do, and you have to be somewhat careful to make sure you follow the law regarding this, different states have different laws, but you want to get something very smelly as a bait source that will help to engage the fish's, okay, I do want to eat drive. There's a behavior that's not legal called churning, where you dump a bunch of, let's say, whatever loose, smelly food into the top of the ice hole, intending for that to sink down slowly and kind of get a frenzy going on. That's not legal to do, at least in Idaho. But there are other things you can do. You can use like a big chunk of Velveeta cheese, for example, and put that on your hook. And that's legal because it all fits on the hook. But once it's in the water, it's going to start dissolving a little bit, get some fish frenzy kind of action going on. And so there's a lot of different things you can do with that. But it can be anything from the very, very simple gear to the very advanced. They do sell auto jiggers. And so if you've got the money and you want to put it into it, it's just a cute little robotic device. It goes roop, 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 and some sort of little set pattern you can tune. And most states that's legal too.
Okay. And so in areas like Idaho where churning is not legal, how do you find the fish?
So again, that depends on your budget. There are fish finders designed for going under the ice. And so it's just the same little sonar concept, but you have to get the little piece down underneath there. I actually don't have one. The way I find the ice is the first thing I do is when I get on the quad and I got the kids with me is I look around and I find the oldest looking dude on the lake. And I zoom over to that dude with the kids, and the kids are pre-programmed with what they have to do. And the kids jump off and they run up and they say, "Hi, we're here to fish. Where should we go fishing?" And this old dude sees this big old gaggle of 3-4 cute little kids running up to them. And he can't help himself. And he's like, "Oh, you cute kids. You should go fish over there in that spot right there." And I'm like, "Yeah, my plan works again."
Oh, that is awesome. Excuse me. You were talking about the fish finders, those that are made for the ice. Do they work on top of the ice, or do you have to drill a hole and then stick your transducer in there? They know they're not here. Let's go over here, drill a hole, stick your transducer in. No, they're not here. How does that work?
So I should put an asterisk. I've never actually used one myself. But my understanding is, from at least what I've seen, it kind of depends a little bit on the size of the lake you're in. In a small enough lake, you're not moving that much. In a bigger reservoir, absolutely. But you absolutely have to drill a hole to get it down there under the ice.
Okay. All right. Well, with all of our guests, there's two questions that we always ask. So I wanted to make sure that in this situation we get a ice fisherman's take on it as well. So, what fishing story or memory means the most to you?
Well, I'm going to share a story with you that just happened this last winter, and I want to brace it. The story starts off sounding a little scary, but don't worry, no one was hurt and everything was ultimately recovered. And so in this particular story, we went out on a Wednesday. We measured the ice. It was more than thick enough. And then we had 2 nights where the low was below 0. And we went out on a Friday. We jump out, we throw the quad on the ice, we start taking gear out there, and the quad starts sinking through the ice. What had happened, I didn't know at the time, is the lake had turned over. This doesn't happen very often, but it was one of those years, it got super cold, super fast. The top layer had frozen. There's still a lot of warm water deep in the lake. And the lake actually rotated, and the warm water came up and actually started melting the ice, turned into a lovely slush mess that I chewed through with the quad, and the quad started sinking. And this sounds terrifying at first because you're now out in the middle of, lake. You've got a big ATV that's half in the water. There's children involved in the story. Everyone would be like, "You must be freaking out." And internally, I think I probably was a little bit freaking out. But the kids weren't near the event. I quickly got the children to a safe area of the ice by figuring out what was going on. And it was a few hours trying to get this quad out. It didn't sink very quick. And we ultimately failed that day. We had to come back a different day to finish the job. But what I think was really so powerful, the story, is as this event is going down and you're worried about, this piece of equipment, you're worried about the safety of human lives, you're worried about are the children getting frustrated and annoyed. At one point we paused the whole thing, went over, set up the cute little heated tent in a safe area, got the stove going, made some hot food for these kids, set them up with some games, got them doing some fun stuff. And so they still had a good time. But this whole time going on, it's kind of scary. And there's some danger involved in the situation. I had 2 other dads with me. And near the end of it, one of the dads comes up to me and he says, "Michael, this has not been my most enjoyable ice fishing trip with you." And I said, I'll call him Bob. I'm like, "Bob, that's not unreasonable given that it was not my most enjoyable ice fishing trip either." He said, "But I really respect that you have role modeled for these kids that a Christian man doesn't curse, doesn't give in to throwing temper tantrums, doesn't lose his temper because something doesn't go the way he wants it to go, but he keeps his cool, loves the people around him, and keeps things in priorities." And not once in that entire time did I raised my voice as I started going down to me, as everyone say back, for a safety style. But beyond that, it was a very anger-free event. It was a very calm event. We still had a great time. And I think what's so memorable to me about this, it helps that we did eventually recover the quad. What's so helpful to me, though, is I got to witness to the kids what happens when things go wrong. And I think, Cam, all too often in life, we live in this Facebook generation where everything goes right. Look at Facebook. Everyone's having a grand adventure. Everything's going perfect. Look at this social media, that social media, YouTube, whatever. And I don't think kids get enough times to see oh, shoot, this has gone really bad. My wife was totally freaking out. That's a whole separate story. I had all the kids, though, so it was fine. And the modeling for them to see that, and that we still made something important out of it, and that we just role modeled the people are what's important. The people are safe. We're going to care for the people. We're going to do everything we can here to make sure that the right priorities are observed. And it was a very powerful day.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. I mean, in social media and content creation in the fishing community, it's always a highlight reel. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a 6-minute video of look at these 7 fish that I caught today, but it doesn't show the hour and a half that you spent picking out backlashes and pulling out lures out of trees and all of the frustrations that can be involved. And so whenever a new angler or a kid or somebody goes out and goes fishing and experiences that, they get frustrated because I watched so and so's video and they don't have this stuff happen. It's like, well, they do. You got to remember they were out there for 8 hours and you got to see a 6-minute video. It's definitely important for kids to see things go wrong and to see how we react to that. And it's important for us to remember that we are being watched in how we react to that. So that's awesome.
I have to share one super quick addition to that. One of the funniest ways, you mentioned like getting lures stuck and whatnot, the funniest way that's unique to ice fishing to get a lure to be stuck is you've got your pole and a holder, the line goes straight down on the ice, and we always bring dogs. And the dog walks over there and gets himself on the line and then starts walking away. And you see the line slowly being pulled up through the ice hole. There's a hook at the bottom, but the dog's nowhere near the hook right now. The dog's just in the middle of the line, walking sideways, dragging that line up out. And you see all the dads yelling, "Belle, stop, go on, stop." When the dog goes, "Huh? What? Is that me?" And you run over and it's generally fine. But it's just one of the funnier ways of things to get stuck is nowhere else in fishing I've ever had a dog take off with my line.
Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought about pets, but yeah, that's another aspect to it for sure. All right. So whenever you're out fishing with somebody, what is your typical conversation like? What's it centered around?
You know, I think it really depends on what I'm struggling with, what he's struggling with. I'm the sort of guy, I don't love to sit there and chat for 2 hours about the weather or about some local sports team. These days, politics is becoming more of a serious topic. Give it or leave it, whatever you want to look at it. It's getting worse. But I really think the whole value of fishing is a real conversation. And you got to weight it. Like, you know, when you got a bunch of kids around that are coming in and interrupting you a bunch of times, you're not going to jump into, "Hey, I'm struggling in my marriage," with this particular thing. That's not appropriate. But what commonly happens in almost every fishing event I've come to is there's a window somewhere where there's nothing happening. And, you know, one of the great things we do with ice fishing trips is if the kids get bored, we always bring sleds and we tell the kids go sled on some of the hills by the shore. And they go do that. And then, you know, a couple other dads and I will sit there and you have a real conversation. Lately, the last couple ones we've been having, it's been around marriage. I think marriage right now in our time is under attack in a very powerful way. And I've been finding that when I am vulnerable with guys to say, "I'm struggling with this aspect of my marriage, I'm struggling with that aspect of my marriage," almost immediately you can see their eyes light up and whether they say it or not, their body language says, "Yeah, me too." And if they're courageous, they'll say it out loud.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, with all of our guests, we do a segment called "What's Your Favorite?" It's self-explanatory. I'll ask you your favorite in a few different categories, and we'll have some fun with it. But we will get that started right after this. If a fly rod is your weapon of choice, check out Atollas. Their Fly Caddy is the most convenient way to get your favorite flies to the water or just keep them handy by clipping it to your hat, truck visor, backpack, rod case, or just whatever. You can also bundle it up with flies from independent fly tires that Atollas has teamed up with through their Fly Light project. Choose from bundles specializing in redfish, carp, saltwater, or freshwater. Head over to atollas.co, that's ATOLLAS.co, to get your Fly Caddy today and use promo code FAITHINFISH15 to save 15% on your order. That's faith the letter N, fish the number 15 at checkout for 15% off. Mr. B Lure Company is making high quality handcrafted lures and has been for 30 years right here in the US. Using all metal components, Owner and Gamakatsu hooks, and silicone or frog hair skirts, Mr. B is pumping out some awesome spinner baits, jigs, buzz baits, underspins, and more, including some of the most unique bladed jigs on the market. To fill up your tackle box, go to MrBLureCompany.com. That's MRBLureCompany.com and use promo code FaithandFishingPod1X10 at checkout to save 10% on your first order. That's Faith the letter N, Fish the letter N, P-O-D, so Faith and Fishing Pod, just like our Instagram handle, 1X10. All right, so to get us started off, what is your favorite scripture?
I'm going to go to a book that people might not know. Some Protestants might call this apocryphal. It's the book of Sirach, or sometimes the Wisdom of Ben Sirach, or sometimes Ecclesiastes. It's the second chapter. I believe it's verse 5. I may have the verse number slightly wrong, but it's, my son, when you go to serve the Lord, prepare yourself for an ordeal.
I love that. I'm not well versed in the Apocrypha, so yeah, that's a good one. I love that. And say the book name again.
It's Sirach. And if you've never read before, Sirach is this amazing book. It's one of the very few books of the Bible where the author identifies clearly who he is and who he's addressing. But chapter 2 of Sirach is one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. It's very practical. It's very inspiring. It's also very real. The book of Sirach is a very gritty book. Like, you read that and they're not like, everything's good and it's all great. It's like, this stuff's going to suck. Get ready.
Okay. I love it. All right. So your favorite story from the Bible?
My favorite story from the Bible is probably the story of I have to remember the right term for this. It's the unrepentant servant, the servant who the master forgives 10,000 talents to, then he refuses to forgive 60 denarii to. And the reason I love this is because I identify so much with this guy. Like, he's so me. And I just see myself, and every day I'm like, but dude, that's 60 denarii. That's 60 days labor. What? Come on. You can't just walk away from me with that. Like, this isn't fair. It's not right. It's not just. And every time my brain goes back there, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. The 10,000 talents. Okay. I get it. All right. Go ahead. Take the 60 denarii, I guess. Once.
Awesome. All right, so your favorite fish to catch?
I love perch. So there's a reservoir here in Idaho called Cascade Reservoir, and they're famous for jumbo perch. And jumbo perch almost look like a frog. They're so like fat. And I've always loved perch. Growing up in northern Michigan, I've always loved perch. My grandmother, she would take perch, we'd fillet it, and she would take the orange Cheetos, the kind of cheesy, like curd, kind of curly ones, smash those up, roll the perch in butter, roll them in those things, cook them up that way. I don't know why, but that's always been my favorite. I love eating those so much.
All right. So, what's your favorite fish to fish for?
I really enjoy pike a lot. I love the fight. There's something that feels like I feel like they're mad at me, and I feel like I'm winning when I finally get to take out some anger back on them. Like, one story I had this one time, I was fishing with my dad, and I hit this huge boom, hits the pole, big, like bends the pole in half. I'm like, Dad, I got a big one. Well, it took the line and ran. The drag was set too low, ran down to the bottom, muddied itself up in all the weeds, comes and all of a sudden it feels like the line is just dead. Like 5 minutes of slow, painful, like reeling it back in to know I don't break the line. I see like a mass of weeds, like 2 foot in diameter and like 6 feet long of weeds. And I reach on down there and I'm like, oh, Dad must be gone. All I got is weeds. And I'm pulling these weeds off and throwing them, pulling them off and throwing them. And like another 2 minutes pulling weeds. And I see a flicker and a flash in the middle of the weed pile. And my dad saw it too. He's like, you're not done yet. Grab that pole. And so I grabbed the pole. Fish takes off. Got to fight him again. I love those stinkers. They put up the fight. That's
awesome. Have you ever been nicked by one?
I have not yet, praise the Lord. So I kind of treat them with some respect because those teeth look fearsome.
Absolutely. And their saliva has an anticoagulant. So like if you just barely nick your finger on it, it just bleeds and bleeds and bleeds and bleeds and does not stop. It's vicious. We don't have pike, but we have chain pickerel, which are very similar. They just don't get near as big, and they love the swamps and stuff. And they are they have all kinds of nicknames, from jackfish to snake to snot rockets to all kinds of fun nicknames. But yeah, for sure.
Do they have the extra row bones like pike do? Like, that's one of the things that I remember my grandfather teaching me about pike. So pike have one extra, I don't have demonstrated them in the camera, but the pike have one extra set of bones along their back. And so when people fillet them, they always get really frustrated. And my grandfather always taught me that extra set of bones, you just cut right through it, fillet the rest of it like normal, flip the fillet over on its side, and you can slice right along the whole string of it and pull the bones right out that direction. Okay. So that's a pro tip if it ever comes up.
Maybe. I've never eaten them. I know that that there are those that do, but I've never tried them. So, but yeah, yeah. All right. So back to what's your favorite? Your favorite fish to eat. I think you may have already dove in on this one, but.
Yeah, that's got to be the perch. Although I will say the lake trout in Michigan were pretty good too. So those definitely get an honorable second mention there.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, I've eaten my fair share of perch. They're also a bony fish, but they're delicious.
The flavor is just so good.
It is. All right, so you already talked about how you're cooking the perch and everything. And all right, so what is your favorite fishing snack?
Probably gummy worms, and that's nostalgic. My grandfather, I remember, he taught me this trick about how to just keep kids engaged and just slow little bit of food here and there. He'd call them emergency rations. And so he said he'd always get this big old pile of gummy worms, and sometimes it was Twizzlers, but mostly gummy worms. And he'd be like, all right, honey dear, I've got the emergency rations just in case an emergency strikes. We'll be ready. And we'd be out there, I don't know, 10 minutes fishing with nothing hitting. And Grandpa looks around. He's like, oh, I feel like there's an emergency coming on. Might need to hit the rations. And so I just have this nostalgic memory of not catching any fish, but Grandpa being like, well, the fish aren't eating the worms, so I guess you boys should eat these worms instead. That's
awesome. Yeah, I actually took Henry out fishing today. He loves it. He's begging for it. We've been a couple of times this week actually, and he main thing, just like that, it's snacks are king whenever you're taking a toddler fishing. So we had our fair share of Cheez-Its and Pop-Tart today. So
this one buddy of mine I met, and at the time I said, hey, we should take these 5 kids fishing in this canoe. And he looked at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, dude, just trust me. And we were out there for probably 3 hours, and I had a whole bag of different snacks, and I just kept feeding them out slowly by slowly. And we get done with that. He's like, dude, I can't imagine you got 5 children to sit in this canoe with the 2 of us adults for whatever hours, and they were happy the whole time. Like, yeah, you got to pump the food.
Yeah. All right. So important question. You have are you going after the regular gummy worms or the sour gummy worms?
Oh, you're pulling on my heartstrings, man. I love the sour ones, but I got to do the regular ones for the kids. They've got more holding power.
Okay. For sure. So for you, are you brand loyal? Does it have to be the Trolley Bright Crawlers?
I don't know. So we have a Wingco brand of grocery store here that has these bulk bins, and I don't know what they put in them, but they've got some sour worms that are pretty good. And so I wouldn't say I'm like die hard brand, but you don't want to get burned. You have to be an adult. You don't have that much in your sugar budget, and you hate to blow the sugar budget on something that just doesn't satisfy.
I hear you. That's awesome. All right. So let me find where I am. All right. So don't need GPS coordinates or secret spots or anything, but what is your favorite body of water to fish?
Ooh, that's tough. Probably right now there's a little reservoir, and you can just Google search this, called Horse Thief Reservoir. And what I love about Horse Thief Reservoir, first off, the ice gets super thick, super fast. So it's a great spot to go for that. Although get a check before you go if it's slushy. Never take kids ice fishing if they're slush. I can't believe I didn't mention this. With ice, so I'm going to pause for a second. This is really critical for any dads that ever want to go ice fishing. You can have 6, 8, 10 inches of ice. Even if I've even seen 14 inches of ice, that's solid ice, but the very top will melt a little bit and then turn slushy. That's fine as an adult. You can wear mucks, walk right through it. Don't take kids out in it. Just no, especially not little kids, no one under 8. Because here's how it goes. Hey, Dad, watch me. Whoosh. Oh, Dad, I'm cold and wet. Trip over. Not worth it. And so just don't do that. But otherwise, Horse Thief's awesome. They stock it with 8, 10-inch trout, little rainbows that are great for the kids. There's some bigger ones that live in there too. So if you're patient, you can sometimes pull up some of the bigger ones. And it's a little smaller. It blocks the wind. And it's just a cute little lake in a beautiful up high elevation, northern Idaho, central Idaho for that one, that I really love.
Okay. Absolutely. And your favorite lure to throw?
Red and white daredevil, by far. That was one. That was my grandfather's favorite lure. And I don't know if it's just, I have positive thoughts about that one. If God blesses the one I've got, I don't know. But that one just seems to hit more often. It's so simple. It's been around forever.
Oh, is that a spoon?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And this one seems kind of silly to ask in this particular episode, but it's part of the what's your favorite? What is your favorite time of year to fish?
Well, I obviously have to, go for this, but I'll throw out there probably end of January, early February, because you have the least amount of slush. You haven't got much warmth yet, but you've gotten thick enough now where the ice will hold. But I'll put one caveat there for middle of July, because if the fishing's really slow, you just jump in the water and go swimming.
Nice. All right, man. Well, we are going to start wrapping things up. If you will, let us know what's coming up for you.
What's coming for me? Well, I've got a number of new things I'm launching on the life coaching side. And so I really mean it when I say God's put on my heart to talk more about marriage. And so I'm right now rolling on a cute little program. I have this engineering background. And I think there's one big problem right now where engineers marry women. And here's there's masculine and feminine, right? And engineers, the more nerdy, the more detached from their feelings kind of guys, they tend to marry the opposite, which is women that are the most attached to their feelings. And so I'm putting a communication course together to try to help bridge that gap. And so that's actually being launched right now. I've got a couple books in the pipeline that are coming up. Can't tell you when they're coming out because that depends on, I've got 6 kids, so I can't really answer that one with too much definitiveness. But in terms of, I'll answer the question totally differently. Right now, as I look at my window, we've got about 90% of our snow melted off. It's middle of April right now. So it's been a cold spring, but we're probably got another 2 months. And then the high altitude lakes start opening up for canoes. That's the next thing for fishing up here.
Nice. Awesome. So, plug your socials and your, you've already mentioned your website. Do you work, in terms of life coach, do you do virtual stuff or is it just local?
So everything I do is virtual. That's just kind of the way the world's going right now. And I love living out here in the middle of nowhere. And so that means I got to do virtual. In terms of social media, I have a confession to make. Don't tell too many people this. I don't like social media. And so you're not going to find me on much of it. Really, it's the podcast, Catholic Life Coach for Men. I feel like God's telling me to start a YouTube channel. Remember before how stubborn I mentioned I was? That's coming up, right? Right now in real time, as God's like, Michael, you should make a YouTube channel. I don't want to make a YouTube channel. God, all right, I'll think about making a YouTube channel. I know the Almighty is always right, but I'm just a stubborn guy. I have trouble admitting that.
That's one I've been struggling with too, and I've been kind of arguing with them a little bit and say, whenever you give me 2 more hours every day,
right?
Maybe I'll start editing videos.
Isn't it great where we try to negotiate with God as if we have any credit to negotiate whatsoever? We all do it.
Yes, we do. All right. And I want to give you an open floor to do any shout outs. If you have sponsors or supporters, anyone you want to say thank you to, the floor is yours.
The biggest one I have to start off with is my wife. So I married this amazing woman who's had 6 children for me. It's amazing. We've had 6 kids in 8 years, actually, and we're raising them together. We're homeschooling them together. We're doing the life coaching thing together. She's a life coach as well. And so if you're a lady who's interested in working with someone who's religious, you can find her at madeforgreatness.com. She also does a bit of business coaching. So by all means, check her out. Her name is Sterling. You'll find that plastered all over the website. So I have to start with her. Beyond that, I think the biggest shout outs are to me, and this, I get no business benefit out of there, but if it ever gets back to Ben or Gary or Victor or Chow or who's the guy putting one more guy's name? Can't believe I'm getting his name. Anyways, it'll come to me in a second here. These are the guys who have made a huge difference in my life. They are the reason I'm here before you today, not some hot nutcase in, some house in that straitjacket. And I cannot let it go by saying that the mentors that God has given, Dan, that's right, Dan, without the mentors God has given me in my life, I wouldn't be here today. And I have to give credit back to there.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, man, or Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed diving into to life coaching and ice fishing and a lot of stuff this episode I did not know a lot about going into, and that's always a fun thing for me. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it, man.
Thank you, Cam. It's been a delight to be here. You're a fun guy, and I hope the audience has benefited as well.
A huge selection and crazy fast shipping is already enough to turn heads as an online tackle shop, but Omnia Fishing sets themselves apart with their ambassador program. With Omnia, you can send in fishing reports for your local lakes that recommend baits, structure, tactics, and gear. And when another angler takes your advice and purchases something from your report, you get credit for it to spend at Omnia. The best part means that with Omnia Fishing, you can shop by lake and purchase baits and gear that are proven to work where you're fishing. To get started, go to omniafishing.com and use promo code FNF15 to save 15% on your first order.
Few things ruin your day on the water as bad as losing gear. But with the retrieval devices for fishing rods, action cams, bow fishing bows, and more from Save Your Outdoors, you don't have to let dropping your stuff ruin your day because you can get it back. The pressure-sensitive filter keeps water from rain and quick dips in the water out, but it lets water in when your gear goes overboard to release a float attached to your gear by 60 feet of line so you can get it back. Go to SaveYourOutdoors.com to learn more and try some for yourself, and use promo code FNFP15 to save 15% on your order. That's SaveYourOutdoors.com and promo code FNFP15. Another huge thank you to Michael for coming on the show and sharing his story with us. All of his links will be in the show notes, so make sure you check those out, as well as the All Things Faith and Fishing link that will have all of our sponsor links. It will have links to the YouTube channel, the website, merch store, all of that good stuff. And so, Robert is not here, so he is usually the one who has the really awesome thing to say at the end. So we're just going to dive right into the prayer, and so if y'all will pray with me, and I will close things out. God, thank you so much for this podcast and this opportunity to virtually meet so many awesome people and to hear so many amazing stories and to share those stories with those who are listening. Thank you for everyone who has tuned into this episode, and thank you for Michael and what he means to so many and what he is doing in your name and what you're doing through him. Thank you for his willingness to come on the show and share his story and share your light. And God, I ask that you wrap your comforting arms around the Dillon family and give them that peace that surpasses all understanding in this difficult time, and surround them with people who can give them that earthly comfort as well, and just use everyone around them to warm them and be there for them. And God, as we go through this week and whenever someone is listening to this, pray blessings over that week for them, and in all of this we ask in Jesus' name, amen. All right, y'all, that is going to do it for this episode. Y'all take care, and God bless. Thank you for listening to the Faith and Fishing podcast. Faith and Fishing is produced and hosted by Cam Steele and Robert Randolph, and is sponsored by Save Your Outdoors, Jay's Jigs, Get Outdoors Pedal and Paddle, Mr. B Lure Company, Atollas, and Omnia Fishing. Don't forget to join the Facebook community, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever app you're listening on. That's going to do it for this episode. Y'all take care, and God bless.